This is The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Over our 12-episode season, I will share some of my best sweater knitting techniques with you while we knit a sweater together. Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 10. 10! Is that really it? Are we almost done? I'm finished with my knitting. I'm very excited about that. And today we're going to talk about the beginning of finishing work. And when you're working a sweater in the round or semi-seamlessly, I've asked you to hold those stitches aside for the underarms. And instead of sewing them together from bound off edges or doing a 3-needle bind off, I highly recommend doing the Kitchener stitch, which magically weaves the stitches together from 2 different directions. If you've ever knit a sock top down, it's the same principle there, and it makes this lovely smooth transition between the 2 directions of fabric. And the great thing about that is there's no seam, there's no rubbing or irritation, and it's a very slick way to finish things off. So as you may recall, I've got all those stitches held on waste yarn. And I'm going to go ahead and slip those back to my needle. And what you want to do is line up the stitches from the body on one needle and then the stitches from the sleeve on second needle. And using waste yarn is really nice because it just holds the stitches open and it's flexible as opposed to stitch holders. You can use stitch holders, and that can make it easier to slide the stitches back onto the needle, but I find generally if I use a waste yarn that's slightly thicker than my yarn or the same thickness, it's not a problem. If you use really thin waste yarn, the stitches can close up a little, and you can still kind of wrestle them out. And in fact, this last one is a little snug, but there we go. So I've got my first set of stitches on the needle, and I use the needles I was using to knit with. I wouldn't use needles that are any bigger. If you have already started your needle on another project, you could go with maybe a size smaller, but I wouldn't do more than that. When we're weaving, we're actually creating another row of stitches between these 2, and so we don't want to distort those stitches by using a different size needle. So really the best thing to do is to just hold on to your needles from knitting the sweater and use them for the weaving. And so here I'm going to do the first half of the sleeve. And remember, our sleeve, because it's knit flat, has half of the stitches at the beginning and half at the end. And that may have been a little confusing when you were joining everything together, but I hope it's clear now. All right, and these are feeling a little, I'm wrestling just a tiny bit with them, but that's okay. So there's the first half. Make sure you don't snag the waste yarn itself, which I fear I may have done. And then you go, so we've started from the back for the sleeve stitches, and then you want to keep going so that they're all in a row. And so we've gone towards the middle where we'll be doing the sleeve seam, and now we want to continue from the edge to the body so that they will line up nicely together, because what we're going to do with Kitchener stitch is pair the stitches together from the body to the sleeve and back and forth, and we will just be weaving the yarn and creating a new row of stitches. And if you look at it while you're going, it really is kind of magic, and it just makes for a lovely smooth. But right now you can see that our stitches are parallel, and that's how you want to hold them. And the reason I weave together the underarms before doing the seams is that when you sew up the seam, you're actually consuming a stitch or 2. You do your seam a half stitch in from the edge of the knitted sleeve, or even a whole stitch. And so those get sort of eaten up into the seam, which is fine. But when you get up to the top, when you get to the point of weaving, if you've already sewn up your seam, you're missing a stitch or 2 from the sleeve part that you're going to Kitchener together. and it ends up being a stitch or two off. And the point here is to match. So Jane has been holding my waste yarn. It's not waste yarn, I'm sorry. This is working yarn threaded on a blunt tip tapestry needle. And I choose to use a blunt tip because when you're going back and forth, a sharp tip would potentially snag in the yarn. And what we're doing is creating, again, that row of stitches. And so we just want to be really gentle. And I think I have about 25 inches worth of yarn here. And I would say somewhere between that and a yard of yarn is good. You want to make sure when you start that you leave a decent tail so that we can clean up any little holes that might occur at the edges. And I'll show you another trick for making sure the edges of this woven part are tidy. So to start Kitchener stitch, we sort of start in the middle of what will be the moves for Kitchener stitch, the way I think about it. So here we are with our stitches on 2 needles. And make sure you've got the same number of stitches on the front and the back. So we'll begin by putting our tapestry needle threaded with a length of yarn. I use, say, 2 feet to a yard. So that's 24 to 36 inches. Pull the yarn, put the needle in as if to purl the front stitch, pull through and leave about a 6-inch tail. And if you anchor the tail with your thumb there, it should stay. Now we're going to go back to the back needle. The yarn should always stay under the needles. And we're going to go in as if to knit that stitch. Pull the yarn through gently. Don't pull really tight. I'll show you at the end how we can sort of tidy things up if you're a little loose, but it's always easier to tighten up loose stitches than it is to loosen up tight stitches. Now we're going to go back to the front needle and go in as if to knit, and we're going to slide that stitch off. And there is our first stitch Kitchenered. Now before we go back to the other needle, we need to go through the next stitch on the needle as if to purl and leave it on the needle. And now we'll go to the back and purl and take the stitch off. And we're going to go back and forth between the needles doing these 4 steps. So now back as if to knit and it stays on. Front as if to knit and it comes off. Front as if to purl, stay on. Back as if to purl, take off. Every once in a while, scoot your stitches up the needles a little so they're close to the tips. It just makes it easier. Now, I need to go through the back stitch on the back needle as if to knit. Come to the front stitch as if to knit and take the stitch off. Be careful not to snag any other threads. And you can start to see the row of stitches between the 2 sets of live stitches, and we're creating another row of stitches. So you want to make sure that you go into each stitch twice. So once as if to stay, front as if to purl, back as if to purl and off, back needle as if to knit and stay on, front needle as if to knit and stitch comes off, front needle as if to purl and the stitch stays on. And we'll go back and forth, and this of course is, I shouldn't say of course, but this is how you weave stitches together in stockinette stitch. If reverse stockinette, you would work it in reverse. And we're almost to the stitches at the center, and that's where of course we have this split for the seam of the sleeve. And there's really nothing particular to do there, just be careful because this stitch will be a little loose because that's where your tail is from. So just try and hold on to it as you make it and know that we can go back and tidy things up a little later. So it's not really magic. It's just a matter of figuring out the way that you can remember it. I did Kitchener stitch for a long time, always with a book on my lap. before I finally sort of found my rhythm and found my understanding of how Kitchener stitch works. And we're always going back and forth between the needles. You don't take the yarn over the needles. You kind of want to keep yourself under the needles. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Okay, so there I've got half of my sleeve finished. Yay! And now the other sleeve. So we're bringing the edges of the sleeve together at the top. And purl, knit, and of course, and there's my big stitch. That's where the ends of my yarn are still. And I haven't woven in any ends yet. And we'll do that at the beginning of the next episode where we're going to do the blocking. So don't fret. We will cover all the bases. So here we go. I'm closing in on the end of my underarm. I've been doing this a long time, so it should be fairly smooth, but it doesn't mean that, that yours has to be fairly smooth yet. Don't worry about it. Always be gentle. You can always tighten up stitches. It's a lot harder to loosen stitches. So bear that in mind. Try and be relaxed. I know it's not easy all the time to be relaxed while you're doing a more complicated bit of knitting or something that you haven't done before. But my best advice is to try and relax and be really gentle here, because I'll show you when we get to the end that we can go along the stitches and sort of snug them up before we weave in the ends. And some other people feel that they shouldn't use a separate piece of yarn. They want to use the yarn from their tails. And I don't recommend that, because if you have to make a change, I just think it's more of a problem. And I also find, of course, with this, that the tails are in the middle of the underarm rather than starting at one end or the other. And I do weave from one end to the other. Okay, I'm getting close. There's one last little trick here that I want to show you. I'll talk it through now and then I will show you in close-up. Because the thing is, our stitches, they're connected on the row that we're weaving from, the rows that we're weaving from, to the rest of the knitting. But the row that we're creating is not connected yet. Now I'm getting close to the end, so I want to show you one last little refinement that will make your Kitchener stitch even better. So I'm bringing as if to purl through the last stitch on the front and taking that stitch off on the back, as if to knit on the back. Now I'm going to take the last stitch off by going through as if to knit for the front. But before I go to that one last stitch on the needle, oops, sorry for that bit of noise, I'm going to go through the next stitch, the stitch next here, right there, as if to purl, just as if it were on the needle in the next stitch. This will anchor our row of Kitchener stitch into the body of the sweater. So as if to purl. Now I go back to my last stitch, go through as if to purl and take it off the needle. And one more time, I'm going to pretend that this stitch is still on the needle. This one's a little loose and we'll sort of snug that up. And what I want to do is go through this stitch, which is the stitch next to the woven stitches. I'm going to go through as if to knit and bring the thread through to the back of the work. The thing is, the first and last stitches do get a little distorted from the joining round, but we'll tidy that up a little on the back. First, I'm going to show you the next refining step. As you can see, my stitches are pretty even here, but back at the beginning, they got a little tight and a little loose on the first half. And the thing to do is to figure out where your row of Kitchener stitches is, and beginning in the middle, you can sort of tug on those stitches just very gently, moving the slack out of the stitches and over to the side where your tail's waiting. Not too tight, not too loose. Of course, we want it to be just right. And here we are. You can see these stitches are a little stretched out. So pull it a little snug. Again, a little snug. And the last one. And if you remember what we did at the end of our Kitchener, we want to do that to the beginning. And the reason I keep the 6-inch tail at the beginning is so that I can go back easily, go in and out through this next stitches, and then I have enough to weave in on the back and anchor it safely so that the ends won't come popping out. So there, da-da-da-da, are my woven stitches. Yay! Kitchener stitch success. So that's your first step. And then the next thing we need to do is seam together the sleeve. So it goes from being this flappy bit of fabric, of course, to a tube that fits around your arm. And again, we will need another piece of yarn. Again, I like to have about a yard of yarn, probably less for this length of sleeve, but if you have it, I feel better having extra yarn, because when you have too little yarn, you tend to pull really tight and you get worried, and it's just not good. We want to be relaxed. We want to have fun with our knitting, and we want it to be smooth and comfortable at the end. So my first bit of advice on doing mattress stitch is to begin at the cuff, okay? We start at the cuff, we work our way up. We should be going back and forth, and it should all be even because we should have the same number of rows on each side of the seam. But if we accidentally miss a row and there's any possibility of a little bunching, or you've got even things out, it's best to do it up here in the underarm where nobody's going to see it anyway. So I've got tails here. Again, I don't like using tails for weaving and seaming. I just feel like they're never going to be long enough, and it's just best to weave those in separately. And should you ever need to take apart the piece, it becomes more complicated to try and differentiate. So to begin, bring your yarn up through the first stitch. I like to start on the left. And the thing with mattress stitch is that we're going to grab 2 rows, essentially, every stitch. And we're going to go back and forth between the 2 pieces of fabric. If you just hold on to your tail here, that will anchor it, and so we won't need a knot. And what you want to do is try and match up the sides. So if you take, I'm going to do it 1 stitch in. Some people do it a 1/2 stitch in, but there are my 2 sides. And we'll just go back and forth. So there are my 2 rows there. And the funny thing is, if you have done any sewing, usually you do your sewing from the wrong side of the work. But here, it's better to work on the right side. And you can see exactly what you're doing. Again, just like with Kitchener stitch, don't pull too tight. You want your seams to be smooth and even and somewhat relaxed. You don't want them to be tight. It'll just cause things to bunch up and you won't be happy. All right, now every few inches, very gently, being sure to hold on to the end of the work, gently tug just a little to make sure that there's enough thread between all those stitches. But as you can see, it's coming together nicely and it looks virtually invisible. On the other side, we have a tidy little seam. The reason I recommend working from cuff towards underarm is if you do occasionally miss a bar or take 3 instead, you can sort of fudge that stuff away at the underarm. Nobody's going to be looking very closely at your armpit of your sweater. If they are, you can tell them to back off a little. But any imbalance in your pickups, you can just do away with up here in the underarm. Look at how nice and tidy that seam is coming along. So once you get your seam all the way up to the underarm, you'll still be on the outside, on the right side of your work. So take your needle, go through a stitch to the inside of the work, and then you can start weaving in your ends. And we'll talk more about weaving in ends next time, and then we're going to give our sweaters a bath. We'll talk about blocking, the different ways you can block your sweater, and we'll get that much closer to having a finished sweater. So I hope you're having a great time. I hope wherever you are in the process of knitting your sweater that it's going well. If you're not where I am, that's okay. The whole point of having the videos on YouTube and the audio version on iTunes is that you can go at your own pace. So wherever you are in the process, I hope you're having a great time. Thank you so much for being here. Next time we'll do weaving in ends and blocking. And until then, thanks so much for being here and happy knitting. Bye. This is season 1 of the sweater, and we are knitting the solstice cardie together. Many thanks to Karen at Round Table Yarns, Natalie at Remembrances Pottery, Corinna at Picnic Knits, Tara Swiger and my fellow Starship captains, and you for being part of this knitting adventure. Don't forget to visit kathleendames.com/thesweater to sign up for the newsletter before March 25th and get your free copy of the Solstice Cardie pattern in the welcome email. Is it after March 25th? Purchase your copy of the Solstice Cardie from my Ravelry shop. And be sure to share your project on social media using the hashtags KDSweater and Solstice Cardie. Questions? Comments? Just want to share your progress? Visit the Kathleen Dames Design Ravelry forum for support and camaraderie. Thanks so much for joining me, and happy knitting!